Welcome to today's episode of High Tech Redneck. Today we're going to be extracting honey from a honeybee colony that's out in front of my house. This is a colony that overwintered this past year, winter of 2019. And what's great about a colony that overwinters is that it is ready at the beginning of the year for the queen to start laying eggs as early as she can and getting the numbers of the colony, the worker numbers, up really high so that they can start foraging as soon as possible and grow in the colony, and then in preparation for the honey flow. We're in Piedmont, North Carolina, and the honey flow for us is in late March, early April. And the two major nectar sources that are blooming in that time is tulip poplar, which blooms for approximately 2 weeks if the weather cooperates. And the other is our clover, which is common on the grass for several months. And that is what the bees forage on quite a bit. And the next big source for us is blackberries, which grow wild all over the sides of the roads and in fields. I'm taking that first super body off the top there that you just saw because I added that right at the very end of the flow because the top two supers were pretty close to full, and I was hoping that I was going to get 3 supers off this hive because at that point their numbers of workers in the colony were really large. So the second super from the top that I'm about to pull a frame out of that has that entry hole in the top is almost completely full. And if you look at this frame, I want to hold a few of these up for you. You can see what a really good frame should look like when it's all totally of honey. You can see it's nice and capped. You got those nice white, somewhat transparent caps on both sides. It's completely capped all the way across, so that's 100% volume of honey. Each one of these I think weighs probably about 4 or 5 pounds. Each of these frames. I'm going to try to give you some close-ups here so you can see how nice that looks. I wish every frame that I had that I pulled out of supers looked that good. As we're going through this box, I got full 10 frames out of that second super. And you'll notice that I'm using smoke. I'll smoke the front of the hive and the top. It's always good to smoke the bees to get them preoccupied. That's their natural reaction, is for them when they smell smoke is to go into the hive and to try to protect the queen and to get ready to leave because they think it's going to be a fire, a forest fire, and their natural tendency is to get ready to leave the colony. So they go in and suck up as much honey as they can in their honey stomachs and be prepared to take the queen and leave so they can save the colony. And the idea is by the time you're done, the smoke is all gone and they're not they don't actually leave. So you want your extractions to be pretty fast. My goal is usually 15 minutes is about the maximum I want to spend time-wise working in the colony, in the hive, without, so I won't disturb the colony, and I try to get in and out as fast as I can without making a bunch of commotion or noise. So it's always good when you're doing an extraction, or even if you're just doing a hive inspection, to have all your materials prepped that you're going to need and have everything ready so that once you get the hive open you can get down to business and not have to fumble around to find more tools or more storage if you're putting frames up. You can see I'm looking around right now. So you'll see me, I'm using a couple different hive tools there. I'm using a bee brush. These frames that are completely drawn out, you really don't have that many bees to brush off or shake off. You'll see me shaking them sometimes because they're done with those frames. There's nothing else they can do. So the only time they're really ever on them is if they're crossing the frame to go to a frame that's not occupied, or if they're protecting it or chasing hive beetles or something else in the colony away. You won't see them on those frames very much because that's their storage, they think, for later in the winter. I'm using in my smoker fuel there. My smoker ran a little low and started to kind of get light, so I reached over in the flower bed and grabbed some pine needles, which is an excellent smoker fuel. I usually use some old burlap or cloth in the smoker, but it burned down. So you can see there's a frame that's just got just a couple bees on it, which makes my job really easy. And what I'm doing when you see me walk off frame there is I'm going over and I've got a Rubbermaid tote with a lid that I'm dropping those down in once I get the bees completely off of them. And my goal is to get as many of those frames in that box without getting any bees in the box, that's that tote, so that when I take them inside to my house later to extract in our extractor, I won't have bees flying around in the house. And some other things I see I want to tell you about my setup here. This is the way I learned to. I took my beekeeping classes from North Carolina State University, and they have a really good bee program. Some of their classes are free, so I strongly suggest that you check them out, especially if you're in the North Carolina, South Carolina area. But their general way that they kind of teach is to use two deeps. You want to limit the amount of volume or space the bees have to protect and keep warm during the winter, and protect throughout the year. So if they don't need the space, the colony's not really large, you want to keep it a little smaller. But as they grow, you want to grow the size of the hive bodies or the hives, so that you've got space for them to continue to store food. And our idea is that as a beekeeper, the top section is where we want them to put a surplus of honey, and that second deep you see up from the bottom is ideally where they'll have their food to survive through the winter. So when I get done today, you're going to see I'm going to pull those two smaller supers off the top, and I'm going to leave them with the two deeps. And the idea is the bottom deep is hopefully their brood box. They will lay brood in that second box. I generally don't use queen excluders on my colonies, because most of my bees, I rarely have any trouble with them going up in the top boxes, because the bees' natural tendency is to lay their brood down lower. But you will occasionally see them move up. Certain varieties of queens seem to do that more. So these frames are looking really good. I got a little piece of burr comb there where they were building out towards another frame. You saw that on that one. And I just go ahead and put that in the box, and I'll cut that off. And what I try to do, and what every beekeeper I believe tries to do, is try to, when you decap these and get ready to extract, if you're going to spin them, you try to save as much of the wax foundation as possible intact in comb format, so that you save the bees the labor from having to use it again next year. So I haven't always had the best luck with saving my comb over the winter and keeping it from my frames and the comb from keeping it from getting messed up, but by wax moths. But what I usually do is I'll freeze them. I'll take them inside after I've extracted them, and I will freeze the frames for a couple days, just make sure I kill any wax moth eggs or any other kind of eggs that could be in the frames, like a hive beetle. And then I will pull those out, and I'll put them in plastic bags and stick them into some sort of storage box that's somewhat airtight, so that nothing can get to them. And that'll save your bees a lot of time over the next season, when it comes time for them to get their colony set up to forage and bring in nectar and pollen. And they won't have to waste time building all those combs out. They'll just basically clean them up. And it's amazing how much work they do to clean them up and make sure everything's perfect for them. All right, I'm working this last super here. Looks like I've got about 8 frames left, and they'll go pretty fast. You'll see there's not many bees on those. As I said, they're all ready to go. And I can usually just shake them off and then walk them right over and drop them in the box. So what you're going to see here in a few minutes is I'm going to pull these last few frames, and then I'll pull that super body off there, and I will put a inner cover on top of the deep, and then I will put the telescopic cover up, and I usually go ahead and put some kind of weight on top, like some bricks or a rock, to keep the top down. When it's really hot, like it is in North Carolina in July, a lot of times I will actually raise that telescopic cover and put a small block of wood, like a 1.25 inch board in there, to leave a little bit of a gap to vent the hive. I try to kind of decide whether or not I'm going to worry about robbing. If I see there's a lot of robbing activity going on, I will close that top up a little bit, or put a screen inner cover in there sometimes to try to keep anything from coming in the top, but allow the heat to come out. You'll notice this time of year the bees at night are bearding, on the front of the hive when it's just so hot that they can't be inside, and they can't keep it cool enough. So their natural tendency is to send some bodies out so they don't generate extra heat that they don't need. So this particular extraction went really well in this colony. The day that I did this, which was this past Friday, I believe it was the 24th of July, I had already pulled honey from 4 other colonies, and then I'd helped a coworker at my school pull honey from her hives earlier in the day, and it was kind of warm. So this is the end of my day here, and I was really excited. You can't tell, but Maybe you can tell by my gloves, but I am just saturated with sweat. So I was looking forward to being done. But at the same time, you don't want to rush. You want to do a good job, so you don't have to come back and do something later, and you don't want to disrupt the bees and really aggravate them. You probably noticed throughout this video that I was smoking the colony quite a bit, just to kind of keep them going, so you can just keep applying smoke. I'll give you a tip. Make sure that when you're using your smoker, you don't let the material that you're using for smoker fuel start to light near the top of the smoker, because you could very easily blow embers or sparks into your hive, and beeswax burns really well. So I've had that happen a few times. So I try to be real careful when I smoke, and if I'm puffing the smoker, I try to puff it at a horizontal angle, not to put the nose of the smoker towards the colony. Alright, in these last few frames, I think there's a little bit of burr comb where they had them kind of joined together or connected to the top of that deep. So I'm a few more bees on those, but I'm brushing those off. You can see where the comb is kind of open there on the back of that frame as I'm brushing. But that's no problem at all. And I'll take a few seconds here at the end of this just to talk a little bit about the next steps of this. So what I'll do is, don't always do it the same day, since I mentioned I was pretty tired. So I'll put those frames in my basement where it's kind of cool, and in those storage totes. And on this particular day, I had 5 totes full of frames. So I've got quite a bit of honey to extract. And then sometime in the next couple days, I will take a box of those up to my kitchen, and I will decap them using a couple of tools. Usually I use a decapping knife or a scraper, kind of a pick scraper, and I will knock the caps off, try to be as gentle as I can with the combs, and then I use a 4-frame extractor that I have from Man Lake. It's manual, and it works fine. It was a rather inexpensive extractor, and I've used it for about 7 years. And I will put 4 frames in there and spin them around for about probably 2 or 3 minutes per side, and that will sling all the honey off, and all that honey will drain down the sides of the extractor into the bottom. And on the bottom of this extractor there's a honey gate, and once I get it filled up, I will usually, I think it holds about 3 or 4 gallons of honey. I will then open the valve on that honey gate on the bottom of the extractor, and I use 2 different grades of sifters to sift out any foreign material, and then it'll drop into a bucket, and I will let that sit in a 5-gallon food grade bucket that also has a honey gate on it, which we'll use to fill jars later. And I'll leave it in that 5-gallon bucket with the lid mostly closed, just so it can breathe, and let the air bubbles come out of the honey, so for at least a couple days. And then I will jar the honey. And we use 4 8-ounce and 16-ounce jars. The 4-ounce and 8-ounce sell really well at our school. All the honey that we get from these hives goes back to our school, so that we can fund our beekeeping program. And I have hives that belong to the school at my house. We have some in the bee yard at school where we have an educational bee space for our students. And then a coworker of mine, as a science teacher, keeps hives out at his house in another part of the county. And it gives us 3 locations to move things around. So this is going really well. I'm almost done here. You're going to see I'm doing a little cleanup, but I'm getting ready to pop that last super off now that it's empty. These bees have created a lot of propolis around the hive, so I think I had a hard time getting that super off. But once I got it off of there, popped it up, and I got ready to put the inner cover back on. I think I did give them a little smoke, so I make sure I wouldn't squish anybody, and that just kind of forces them down. And all these bees that you see flying around the hive, they'll just go right in the front. If you were to come back out here 20, 30 minutes later, things were pretty much back to normal. And here's my weights. And this hive is in the front of my house, and it's a really good location. It's facing south, and gets them nice and warm.